Welcome to an episode of Behind the Scenes, a weekly program unveiling the biggest political developments in Somali politics and the wider Horn of Africa region. I'm Sultan Mohammed, your host and producer here on HORUFADHI Media. On this week's program, we look at yet another senior Somali National Army commander being killed in an Al-Shabab dawn attack on the front lines. What is going wrong when it comes to these dawn attacks? Of course, we are all aware that the National Army has made significant advancements against the militants in the central regions of the country, particularly HORUFADHI and Galmudug, capturing the important districts of Haradere, Eldere, among other towns and cities, as well as Galad. But we've seen another senior commander killed in the town only a few days ago. We assess this in more detail, and I hope you find this program very informative. Please like, share, and for similar content, do subscribe to HORUFADHI Media Group's channel. Also, do subscribe to HORUFADHI Media Group's second channel, known as HORUFADHI TV, where you are currently watching this program, and where you can find other exclusive programs such as Mahahi Salah, among others. And last but not least, do follow myself, Sultan Mohammed, Sulaiman Hashi, Yasin Abdi, and the wider HORUFADHI Media team on our social media platforms that should appear on the screen any moment. Let's get straight into it, and we look at the current conflict going on in HORUFADHI and Galmudug. Just today, the senior commander of the Somali National Army, General Mohammed Bihi, announced that 47 militants were killed in a two-day operation in the Mudug region of Galmudug, and this has seen a large number of militants killed yet again, which is of course positive to the military, to the government, and to the current war against Al-Shabab. However, an attack on the early hours of Friday morning on a military compound in the recently liberated village of Galad by Shabab militants killed a number of soldiers yet again, including the famous Major Hassan Mohammed Isman, or Tore, a well-known deputy commander of Somalia's Danab Commandos, or Lightning Commandos, a US-trained special forces of the Somali National Army. Now, several initial reports suggest the number of soldiers were killed. Numerous soldiers were killed, However, the Somali government confirmed that 7 soldiers lost their lives in the battle, and that the compound as well as Galad currently remain under Somali government control. Now, early reports from the village indicated that militants began the attack with a twin-car suicide bombing at the gate of the compound just after morning prayers before militant fighters stormed the building. Now, I'm pretty sure many of you guys listening to this program today are very aware of the very tactic that Al-Shabaab use. It is exactly the same tactic they do again and again and again, and it's simply just placing bombs and IEDs, homemade IEDs, in a vehicle, and just driving that vehicle straight into a compound. And as me, who's not an expert in military warfare, and many of you listeners that are not experts in it, we are aware of this situation, and it's quite shocking to many people that the Somali army is simply unable to contain these sort of simplistic terrorist attacks. Now, Galad, alongside Haradere and Eldere I earlier mentioned, are former Al-Shabab strongholds in the region that were recently liberated by SNA forces in partnership with the local clan militia known as Ma'awi Saleh, as they push towards the strategic town of El Bur, the last militant stronghold in the region. Now, according to the Somali government, SNA forces repelled the attack that morning, killed over 100 Al-Shabaab militants in the process, as well as destroying 5 vehicles, including an SNA armoured military vehicle that was captured by the militants in a previous battle. Additionally, the government has confirmed that the village of Galad as well as the military compound currently remain under Somali control, while, and I quote, the bodies of Al-Shabaab fighters litter the ground. Now, conversely, of course, the militants claim to have killed 159 Somali soldiers. On their websites that they post illegal content on, they have posted images of what they claim to be professed victories against Somali National Army. The images I've seen myself don't really showcase that. They simply show burning vehicles, among other things. We don't really have any actual evidence of 159 Somali soldiers being killed. And we all know, Al-Shabaab, like any other terrorist group like ISIS or, its parent organization Al-Qaeda, tend to exaggerate figures to not just boost morale within their ranks, but to also instill fear among residents and to destroy the morale of the National Army. And this is obviously something that we've known Al-Shabaab to do constantly. Now, one thing I want to focus on in this program, which Al-Shabab consistently does as much as lie, is do dawn attacks. The militants have consistently engaged in attacks in the morning in the most recent war we're seeing right now in Galmudug and HORUFADHI. If we simply look at the militant attacks in Beledweyne, Mahas, Hilo Lagab, and most recently Hawadle, Al-Shabab tends to attack at dawn in areas recently liberated by government forces. These attacks resulted in the deaths of senior SNA commanders, including the commander of the 3rd Battalion of the 27th Division, killed in Hawadle on January 17th, or, for example, Major Ahmed Jamal, head of the CID in Beledweyne, who was killed on January 16th. Now, it seems as though their strategy is retreating from the town before being completely annihilated, regrouping and launching an unexpected dawn attack on government positions to inflict the most damage possible while attempting to demoralize soldiers. Now, the reality is that militants are able to still deploy explosive-laden vehicles and devices within Hirshabelle and Galmudug, despite the recent government victories in key strategic towns in the region. The reality is that militants still control areas of the countryside, enabling the movement of not just fighters, but logistical equipment to launch these attacks. Now, to relieve this pressure, the government must work with international partners, not just to increase and intensify air raids, but to identify key strongholds and regrouping locations of the militants to strike them there. Of course, targeting major towns and cities is great and it's important, but we also must focus on what matters here as well, and that is stepping up the pressure on militant supply lines, not just in Hirshabelle, but also in Galmudug, but also in other regions as well, to begin slowly choking the group's strength. And this will require a national effort. But with the increase in political instability in the southwest state, as we know, President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud has returned from a reconciliation conference where he was in Baydhabo, the transitional capital of Koonfur Galbeed, or southwest state Somalia for non-Somali speakers. There hasn't been a particular agreement reached between opposition groups and the state government there, despite Parliament granting an extension of the presidential term to 5 years. This has not been accepted by opposition groups, and it seems as though division remains in southwest state. Similarly, in Jubaland, where Al-Shabab also has a stronghold, we know that Gedo remains an area which has consistently been in political conflict with Kismayo, with President Ahmed Madobe, who's been in office since 2011 and has been rejected by the administration that currently is controlling the Gedo region. This means that there's fractions within the society in Jubaland, meaning there isn't a unified approach to the fight against Al-Shabab. So the issue of militant supplies on the front lines and the simple fact that the war against Al-Shabaab is only being fought in Hirshabelle and Galmudug is the biggest hindrance to this war effort. So, for example, despite the fact that the militants lost the coastal district of Haradere, which of course we know it's an important port town, it's used by the militants to not just import necessary equipment, money, or militant fighters from other parts of the world, but also to export coal, whatever they're trying to export to make money from, meat, things that countries and rogue elements in the Middle East are willing to purchase. So this means that of course this was a strategic area, but if we look at the large scale of things, we see that they control large swathes of territories in other areas south of this, including Lower Shabelle, Middle Juba, which is entirely under militant control, the only region in Somalia which is part of Jubaland, which is in its entirety under Al-Shabaab control. In fact, the de facto capital of Al-Shabaab, Jilib, is located in Middle Shabelle. So in other words, what I'm trying to say is that even though Haradere has been liberated, militants are still able to feed their supply lines, import and export necessary, logistical requirements, money, equipment, whatever it is, the resources that they're selling in other areas. So the war won't just simply end because of Haradere is liberated. We need to have a war that has multiple fronts. It can't just be limited to Hirshabelle or Galmudug. So, who was Major Hassan Toure? Because Allah Haristo, many people have been talking about this commander of the Danab forces. Who was this man? So I just want to make clear, yet again, the Somali nation mourns for another young talent among the security ranks killed on the front lines. And Major Toure was amongst those people. He was among the dozens of rising stars in the Somali security apparatus that have been killed in the current war against Al-Shabaab in very odd circumstances, because many are questioning how Al-Shabaab seems to know where these senior commanders are, because as soon as an area is liberated, for some reason Al-Shabaab is able to target the very command center of these soldiers. Many are questioning how this is even possible. I mean, last year, the well-known and respected young commander of the Somali police force in Banadir, General Farhan Mahmoud Adam, popularly known as Farhan Qarola, was killed in an IED blast in Balad, Middle Shabelle, as he traveled to meet the commander of the National Intelligence Agency, Mahad Salad. Now, many question how Mahad Salad managed to travel through this road and head to the next town in Balad, whereas Farhan Qarola was killed on the very road that these soldiers went through just prior. It just shows the shady business going on. And I'm not accusing anyone of anything, but what I am saying is that Al-Shabaab definitely has insiders within the government. They do know things that they shouldn't be knowing, and they're able to plan out and map out the routes being taken by senior commanders of the Somali police force, of the Somali army, of the Somali government, and they're able to then bomb them. That's why we've seen the triple bombing in Beledweyne. That's why we've seen the killing of Farhan Qarola and the killing of Al-An Hassan Toure, and among all these other commanders. How does Al-Shabaab know these things? And the most recent attack in the lower house, Banadir Regional Administration, how did Al-Shabaab enter this place? We know that the building is in such a secure place. We know that there's serious walls around us. We know there's multiple checkpoints. We know there's serious military presence in this area. It's very near to the presidential palace. So how the militants managed to enter this place, and let alone just this place, we know Hotel Rais as well, or Rose, however you want to call it, that was within the presidential compound too. The Ministry of Education is also an important institution which was raided by Al-Shabab. How the militants are able to do this is a question many people are asking, and the death of Major Toure is amongst those serious questions, and it's not any different. Now, his death resulted in an outpour of sorrow and prayers from the Somali community across the world. Somali users across social media posted thousands of messages of prayers and admiration for the Major, including former prime ministers, presidents, as well as members of civil society and just supporters in general. Now, Toure has been described by military and government officials as the unsung hero of the ongoing military offensive against Al-Shabab, having led down of commandos in a number of successful operations against the militants in the region in recent months. His loss will be a major blow to the Somali army. What Somali army needs to do now, however, is what it is doing, which is retaliating, attacking, but trying to expand this war. The war cannot be limited to Hirshabelle and Galmudug. There have been positive advancements made, and we must admire and support the army and local militia as well for putting these militants, back in their boxes. But the reality is that if the Somali government really wants to see Al-Shabab eradicated by the end of this year, like they claim they want, then they must enter dialogue with Jubaland. They must enter dialogue with Southwest State. Mogadishu must rekindle the relationship with Puntland. Now, we know PSF has been involved in the liberation of Harar Dere, but the PSF, as you know, is a faction within Puntland. What we need is unity in the country. What we need is a unified approach to this war. We need to put our political differences to the side for one moment. But the reality is that Somalia has been in this situation for over 30 years. And if Somalis really, really want to see change, because Al-Shabaab is just one problem. 20 years ago, we had another issue, tribalism, which we still have today. But back then, we had militia groups of tribes. Today, we have Al-Shabaab. Tomorrow will be something new. The fundamental issue isn't Al-Shabaab or militia groups. The fundamental issue is the lack of cohesion within the Somali community, within the Somali government, and within the Somali people. If the Somali people come together, politically, socially, religiously, as we've seen in the recent conference of religious scholars, which is a positive thing, by the way, then we can see changes. And I'm glad to see that the government right now is focusing on cutting economic, resources for Al-Shabaab. They're trying to, at least. I'm not saying they've successfully done it. Of course, it's very difficult because the government barely controls outside of Mogadishu. But the steps are being taken. We have the religious scholars summit going on right now, opened by President Hassan Sheikh just yesterday, which is also a positive step forward. We need an ideological battle against the militants because many people, in the countryside might not fully understand or grasp religion, and being quoted certain parts of the Quran could twist things for them as easily as anybody else. But the military front is the most important. We must continue the pressure on the militants, choking supply lines, bombing regrouping locations, bombing and targeting areas in which Al-Shabaab train. This must be the key to the Somali government's approach to this war.